You're listening to the AV-IT Amplifier. Each week, we'll feature voices and ideas that need to be amplified in the higher education and pro-AV IT communities. This show is brought to you by higheredav.com. And now here's your host, Ryan Gray.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in again to the AV-IT Amplifier. As always, I am Ryan Gray, and I am your host. And every Wednesday, I can't even do it right. It doesn't matter. I mess it up every time. Every Wednesday, your feed will refresh with new content, and this Wednesday is no exception. A very special guest to bring you today that I'm excited to talk to about something that somebody I talk to quite a bit, but now we get the chance to talk about maybe stuff we don't normally talk to. So Evan, thank you for joining us. Would you please introduce yourself and tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Yeah, well, good to be here. RG, EG in the house. We got RG. So Evan Gray, I'm the more famous little brother of Ryan Gray, but it's good to be here. I live in Kansas City, Kansas, by way of Arizona, of the home of the world champion Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, there you go. Had to get that in right off the bat.
We gotta get that in there at some point. But it's good to be here. I work for the University of Arizona Global Campus. This is year 15 at the same institution, so excited to talk a little bit more about that today. But it's good to be here.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you for coming. It's education runs in the family, and it runs long, it runs deep. So I don't think there's not a big surprise that both of us would end up working in higher ed. But to that kind of work in different areas, concentrating on sort of different things. But the cool part is, in the end, it's all about helping students and helping them get educated and change their lives. So what is it that you're working at UAGC, which is the University of Arizona Global Campus, like you said, what are you working on? What are you in charge of? What is it that when you're getting up every day to do?
Yeah, so for the last 10 years, I launched a peer mentoring program. So this is year 10 for our program. So I'm a part of the Student Affairs Department. Like a ground campus, we have Office of Access and Wellness, Student Care, Student Rights and Responsibility, Title IX, all of that. But obviously, UAGC has about 25,000 adult online learners. And so mentoring is our wheelhouse. I manage and oversee a program called Champs Peer Mentoring. Last year, we had about 1,800 new pairs go out. So we are a fast-paced program. But really, the point of our program is to help students feel a sense of belonging, which is hard to do when it's, as an online student. For those out there that have ever done that, it's you and your computer, a lot of late nights, and sometimes you feel like what we call online student island, right? It's just you and your work. But the reality is you're surrounded by thousands of students who are all doing the same thing that you're doing. So our goal, the purpose of our program is to get students connected with one another, so they have that sense of belonging, they have some support, they have friends, colleagues, networking, all the stuff that comes with building relationships. And it is a challenge. There's no straight path to what we do. There's been a lot of zigzagging, over the year, and the journey will never end. There's never just a time where we say, this is how we do it. All of our students are engaged, and moving along. So we obviously are a part of the larger student success initiatives to try to help students retain, progress, ultimately graduate, and move on to bigger and better things, when they're done with their degree.
So, you've been talking about Champs Peer Mentoring a long time. Just going back to the beginning, how did you get involved in, or how did the idea that basically that a key part of supporting students is going to be student to student, and we need to foster that than just say staff to student?
Well, I'll take you all the way back to the beginning, to my own experience, and this is well documented. In fact, on our website is me kind of telling that testimonial about that. But as an undergraduate student, and the fact that I'm in online higher education, I would have never guessed that. Right. My history was always in athletics and building relationships there. I was a college quarterback, but my alma mater, University of Missouri S&T, Science and Technology, they did not care that I was a quarterback. They are a highly regarded academic institution, putting out engineers, people that are building bridges and skyscrapers and running construction companies. And I really struggled once I got there on the academic part. I was really good at the athletic part, really struggled at the academic part.
I mean, but while we're
Um,
there, any records? Any hold
yeah.
any
Oh
records
yeah.
over there? Do you?
Oh yeah. I got receipts.
All
So,
right.
still stand today. But that was a problem. I was very much interested in being a quarterback and not interested in being a good student. And it was around the time I really struggled, and I had to come to some decisions. And I really started connecting with older students on the football team, people that I'm just going, well, how are you figuring this out? You seem to be able to balance the school, balance the work, and all of that, and really got a lot of good advice and support, and made some really critical changes to be able to balance the both. And thankfully that happened. So when I started to work for the university, I had moved with my now wife to San Diego. I was done with my playing and coaching career. I'd been coaching college football for a few years. Thought, well, it's a good time to go get a master's degree, and kind of see what's out there. And I found this just randomly looking in San Diego, what employment or opportunities. I've always kind of been in higher ed. I saw the school called Ashford University, had never heard of it. Um, saw that they were doing online stuff, but they needed people in admissions. So I interviewed on a Friday. We moved in over the weekend. I started on Monday, and now this is 15 years later.
Yeah.
So mentoring has always been a big part of it, and relying upon relationships, and specifically peer-to-peer relationships, was always important, and I would have never graduated if it wasn't for that. Fast forward a few years, I was working at Ashford. I really, kind of dug in on the part of retention and student support and student success. And I was working as an academic advisor, so I had a cohort of anywhere from 300 to 400 students at a time. And during those years, I didn't have any kids, but all of my students did, right? So we have adult online learners, and they would be struggling. I'm just going, well, what's the problem? Why can't you get in, just do your papers, do your studying? And they're like, well, I've got kids that need to go there. I'm working full time. And at that time, I really couldn't relate. I thought, I'm really not a good person to be answering these questions, but I've got to let me tell you who does is the other student I just talked to.
Yeah.
So I started connecting students within my own cohort, exchanging phone numbers and emails. And all of a sudden, boom, I had all these students now connecting with one another. And they just loved, I would hear about it, about how they were talking. And it just kind of dawned on me, said, we need a peer mentoring program. We need a place where these students can go, they can get support, they can build relationships, share ideas and all that. And you tug on enough legs, you do enough presentations to get funding, to get a position and all that. And eventually, 10 years ago, I got my first position within student affairs. And literally they said, okay, go build a mentoring program. I had a Word document, a Qualtrics Excel or a Qualtrics profile, and created applications, and it was started from scratch. But here we are, 10 years later and growing and still thriving. So it's a little bit of the story of kind of how we got there. But the same thing applies. If you're going to make it in college, you got to develop good relationships. And I don't care if you're 50 years old going back to school or you're 18, fresh out of high school. It's about peer support, developing good relationships, no matter where you're at in higher ed.
That's all. So the story of basically seeing something, going, hey, I've done something that works well, and I think this can be expanded, but actually finding and creating the opportunity to institutionalize it. There's so many people in higher ed, I think, that identify things, but it becomes so difficult to make it happen. So you mentioned, enough conversations, pull enough legs, da, da, da.
Sure.
Was it just a matter of being dogged, or were there things you did along the line to kind of move something from an idea and a conversation into something that was kind of being taken seriously?
Right. Well, we know, every institution is going to be a little different in how they make decisions, how they apply, budgets and and that kind of thing. And they had done some pilot research, previously before I kind of took it over. So there was some little bits and pieces, but I stumbled upon some data that a predecessor had tried to kind of work with, but essentially it meant if we had a mentoring program where for every student that could get supported in a certain way, they remained a student, the retention impact was there. And also the more students you have, obviously they become revenue generating. And then if you get enough students that now stay at the university, they find success and our percentages go up. Having just one position, I can ultimately pay for my own position based on the impact that I might have, on retention. And so when, learning to speak the language of your leadership, your ability to have impact and show that was really instrumental. And from that experience, I learned at a very young age, without even realizing it, is that the data that you collect and being able to tell your story, this whole don't take my word for it, let me show you the impact, let me show you and demonstrate what that means, is a great way for people to understand what it could be. So I learned that a very early on in the career is, don't just tell me about it. Show me how this is working. Show me the impact and show me the data that you're collecting and producing, and ultimately the impact that it has on the university. So our retention and graduation committee, I mean, you would talk about a kid green in the gills, getting up there on the conference room with VPs and presidents and just going up there and saying, hey, I can do this. I know it'll work. And here's some things I think I can do. But it was a good experience, personally as well, because I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't have a seat at the table, but hey, sometimes you fake it till you make it, right? Get up there enough times until you get people to listen. And, turns out they made a good choice, I think, a decade ago. So
there you go. It sounds like it's sort of, one part kind of enthusiasm, definitely
Absolutely.
one part, the data and metrics, like you said, to back that up and do the thing.
Sure.
But then also one part just sort of taking a risk, just like just having the guts to say, like, I may not totally know what I'm doing here, but you know what? Not everybody knows what they're doing. So let's go give it a try.
Yeah, and so many, senior leaders that I learned over the time, they're pulled in so many different directions, and they're at that 10,000-foot level, and a lot of times people wait, well, what's the next initiative? What's the next thing that my senior leaders might say? But senior leaders want to get presented with ideas and thought and people that are motivated to take what they've learned and say, this is what I think we can do. And so if you can put that out there and say, here's our plan, here's what we've learned, here's what we've come to that, you put those proposals out there and make them make a decision, make them tell you no, which they did 7 or 8 times until finally I got that right. Kind of senior leader, was able to spend some time and build some trust, that I'm not just saying I can do this, here's the actual plan. And you get the right, kind of stakeholder, that right key person to say, we're doing this and I'm in control of the budget, and that kind of thing. And I talk to people that are in my position and in our industry all the time, at conferences or just other networking events. So many people are at that grassroots level. Like, how did you get senior level buy-in? How did you get the funding? How do you build a staff? How do you get people to say, this is worth allocating funds to? And a lot of that is just presenting a plan, make them tell you no, and put them to a decision, with what you think you can do.
That's awesome. So now like you said, it's 10 years later. So from a fledgling, okay, hey, go do it, to now having, like you said, now managing a team and having fleshed this out and iterated it a lot of times and continual improvement. Like,
right.
what did your first, what did the first version look like versus what it looks like now?
Yeah, well, I mentioned before, there was some kind of pilot things and little, scatter plots, but I had no money. I had no resources other than what, our existing contracts were. So we had Qualtrics. So I developed a Qualtrics survey and used that as my mentor-mentee application. From that, we were able to actually build an algorithm to design our first kind of matching criteria, right? So like Match.com was out there. We always joke that we're like the Match.com, just we're not here sparking love, but we're trying to get people connected and help them build that rapport. I have 2 kids. I work in, IT. I live on the East Coast. And so we were able to collect some of that data and say, okay, I think this would be, a good matching. I had a Word document of basic resources, but I didn't have a home. I didn't have a platform like I do now. So I started, well, how can I actually give them an actual meeting place somewhere like an online student union? During those years, we used eCollege for our course shells. We already had a contract. It was easy to do. So I said, hey, I want an eCollege shell. And I got one. So as students would apply to come to the program, I would assign them up to be a part of this course, this CHAMPS course. It would live right there in their student portal. They have access to it. They could chat. I could communicate with them. And so we had kind of this eCollege shell. Now we work with a great vendor called People Grove. This is our 3rd year of working with them. We just rolled out a whole new version of the platform there. But now it's called UAGC Connect. So it's home to our clubs, organizations, mentoring, alumni connections, and a great vendor. So now we have more of a machine. They have matching algorithms. We can track goals. They're rolling out a mobile app early next year. So now we're utilizing all the latest and greatest technology to help people communicate, give them that place to engage. So it's very different now. I have staff. And speaking of staff, when to actually grow, you can't just be one of one. If you're actually going to develop and scale and grow, you got to have a staff. Well, Ashford at those years had a physical campus in Iowa, in Clinton, Iowa.
Hmm.
But obviously we were primarily an online institution. That's where we were, enrolling more students. And they made the decision to close the physical campus in Iowa. When that happened, federal work study dollars opened up. The university was awarded funds, but instead of having people working in the cafeteria or doing these other things, as money was available, I said, well, I'll do it. I'll take those funds.
Hmm.
I wrote a job description to be able to hire our online student workers. At that time, it was somewhat unheard of. This idea of remote employment was not a thing. This was way pre-COVID.
Yep.
I said, I've got great people, they're more than capable. They need experience. I wrote the job description and was able to get my hands, on being able to use those dollars because nobody else knew what to do with it. Sure enough, I was hiring student employees. Those were my first staff members. And still to this day, we oversee our federal work study program. That's now morphed. They help with tutoring. They help with our marketing department. We had a couple do a Facebook Live event the other day. So the job is morphed, based on, who they are and the other support that they have. But sometimes you just got to get crafty. Things aren't just going to fall in your lap, but you got to find ways, if you're going to move onward and upward with some of that too.
So, I mean, like using the resources available, jumping in. Yeah. Like when something's in there saying, yeah, I'll take on responsibility for this because it can help me, solve a problem. So in like I said, it's awesome. Now this mentoring is folded in with, like I said, sort of a full online, student union feel. And like you said, you guys are working on this way pre-COVID before, it was the thing to do. So when you were doing this, like, how did you go about trying to create the senses of belonging and the connections between people in this pre-COVID world where that wasn't how people thought about building those types of relationships?
Yeah. One of the best way we did it, you can always connect individuals to one another, right? And say, hey, there's a good person that you'll want to do, get connected with and so forth. But that's a hard way to build community. That's one-to-one connections. But a community is made up of a lot of people, right? And it's kind of like going to church for the first time or going to you're a part of a nonprofit. You're like, I want to be here. And I walk in the building and there's a lot of people in here that know each other. I just don't know anybody.
Yeah.
But once you get to know the people, now you have a sense of belonging. I'm like, I need to get more students in one space. And so again, going back to contracts, during those days, we used Adobe Connect was our virtual platform system. I said, you know what? I need to have a chat. In e-college, they had a live chatting feature, like an instructor could put on chat. So I started off by putting in chat. So, hey, at 2:00 on Thursday, I'm going to be in here, hop in here, and let's chat back and forth. Like the very first time I did it, I had like 25, 30 students in there, all chatting back and forth. I'm like, man, these people want to talk to each other.
Yeah.
How can we make this better? How can I get them face to face? So I said, you know what? Instead of doing just a chat, we're going to get online and talk to one another. People are all zoomed out now, right? We all used to meeting in that environment. But again, during those days, that was a new thing. So the very first chat we had in there, I think we only had maybe 10 or 12 in there, but I had a retired business owner. We had military affiliated students. We had a student from overseas that was joining in. They're like, oh, I just miss home. I wanted to see some people. And getting in there, that first chat, I had students saying, this is the first time I've ever actually seen somebody from my university. I talk to people all the time. I've never actually seen a fellow student, a teacher, an advisor. And it just kind of blew my mind going, that's the college experience. For all of us that have been on campus, I could start naming teammates and my advisors and everybody. So starting those chats, and we still do them to this day. In fact, we're having our holiday chat tonight for our students in there. We're going to play bingo and trivia and give away gift cards, and all that kind of stuff. But utilizing that technology, we had the contract, had the opportunity. And so things like that, where you make it personal, they can share jokes, they can tell stories, they can be authentic. It's not, I need to be on my best behavior or check for APA or Grammarly. Like, we're not using people. Just come as you are. This is how, just come and chat and get to know one another. So that was kind of the first thing going on. We may be onto something here. Again, we still do it these days. We bring in guest speakers. We bring in people from career services, faculty members, program chairs. We bring anybody we can that we think would have an impact and that students may want to hear from. Because even the newer students, this is maybe a newer experience for them. But a good opportunity to build that community just by making good relationships, and that's easier to do when you're face to face.
Yeah. Totally. And meeting people where they're at and giving them that experience that they can connect to. Like you said, it is hard to feel like the new person in a group. So it feels like, yeah, sort of embodying the welcoming nature and really living the purpose that you're there for sounds like it's a key part.
Absolutely.
So how do you
The last thing I'll say about that is the authenticity of it is important. So we all know that college experience. I'm going to go sit in class. I'm going to try to say the right thing. I need to be on my best behavior and all that. As soon as students leave that class, they go to their dorm, they go to their frat, they go to their teammates. Now we're having a real conversation. I don't really like that instructor. I'm going to bomb this test.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing really good, where they're honest and authentic and have that space. This was the first time our online students could actually have that space where I'm like, you cannot get in trouble here. We are not recording this. Now, don't come in here throwing F-bomb. You still have to have some kind of there's some guardrails around it, but the idea is just be who you are.
Yeah.
And I think that's the game changer. This is the judgment-free zone, right? I'm not going to send this to the instructor that rubbed you the wrong way, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what happens in student unions and at other places where, a traditional student can be there and just kind of talking with their friends.
That's awesome. And being able to, let me cover up the logo on my shirt. Don't worry about it. I'm not listening. That's awesome. So obviously, you talked about, and I'm sure that the metrics have improved. Like you can see and measure the difference it is for somebody to have a mentor, right? To have that sort of thing. How do you go about recruiting and getting students to be mentors, not just to be mentored, but how does your program cycle through people who are sort of newer and coming in, or those who have been in the university and have something to share?
Yeah. So number one, I have an assessment specialist. Her former title was technology and operations. So number one, to actually do that, you need staff to do that. There's really no way of getting around it. So I have a dedicated person that's in charge of importing students into our system, tracking their data, and making sure that their persistence within our program is also reflected in all of the other university-wide dashboards, multi-initiative trackers, all of that kind of thing. So we import students on a weekly basis and we pair on a weekly basis. So every student who's matriculated into the university, regardless of where they're at or what they're doing, and they didn't even ask to be a part of it, we put this in front of them to say, guess what? As a part of being a student with our university, you get access to a mentor. What a great thing. So we bring every single student in, we import their data, we recruit them, and so forth. So that's kind of how we get our mentees in. Our mentors have always been a little different. To be a mentor within our program, you need to have at least 1 year at University of Arizona Global Campus and a 3.0 GPA. We think it's very important that you have experience at our university and understand and have proven that, hey, I can be here for at least a year. We actually did kind of a one-off initiative a couple of years ago called the We See You project. And essentially what that meant was we have all these students that have made it onto the dean's list. They're showing really good, early on success. And so every leader at the university, we divided up that list and we called them just to say, you're doing great. Normally you get the calls that are like, you're not doing all that great, or what's going on in this class, or what's your attendance like, or I need you to fill out this financial aid document. They're never called because they're doing the right thing, right?
Yeah.
So we did this campaign and it was really eye-opening going, our students love to be recognized for the work they do. So I took that of what we learned from that and developed this mentor recruitment process. So now we import students as they get to 18 credits within our university. They're basically meeting our academic threshold to be a mentor. We developed a program called our Mentorship Leadership Training Program. So every student that passes through that threshold, we import them in, we invite them in. It's a kind of a 3-week program. They get connected with one of our program coordinators. They get training, they start to build relationships, and then eventually we get them ready to be a mentor. So we have these cycles that can continue on a weekly basis. On any given day, we'll probably have, or any given week, we'll have anywhere from 50 to 200 students that are eligible to be mentors. Where, depending on enrollment, seasonality, that kind of thing, we'll have 300 or 400 mentees who are imported in. And from that, we do the best we can to recruit. But those things happen. That's not how it always was. It was kind of manual process and all of that. But we've learned over time to say, we want to cast this blanket over as many students as we can, demonstrate the benefits from them, but bring them in. And that kind of repeated import process helps you scale and grow because you're not missing groups of students. You're saying if you're eligible to be one or the other, we're going to welcome you in. We're going to recruit you. We're going to try to make it as painless as possible. All of your student ID, your phone number, all that relevant data, that's brought in. You don't need to enter it and all that. You're not applying for a job. We're just kind of helping you get your profile ready and so forth.
Nice. So then, as we sort of move towards the end of this first half hour, those of us that are a little, I don't know, it was ground based. What did you refer? What was the
the ground based? We call it brick and mortar, right?
Yeah,
you actually have a building to go to.
Yeah, exactly. So for people that are kind of more brick and mortar, or in this case, like people whose work in IT may center around like physical learning spaces and or hybrid, the spaces that are trying to meld, online presence with physical presence and those sorts of things. Like, in the time that you've spent doing this, what would be your sort of advice or wisdom for people about using the importance of connection to improve students' experience?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is you have to know your students, and there's that that term of obsessing over data or looking at it. Student bodies change from year to year. External factors change from year to year. We all know what it was like trying to go from pre-COVID to COVID, now after COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Everything will always change around us, and so if you're in charge of creating those spaces or developing programs or trying to set the stage for the student experience, you need to know who your students are. You need to understand their external factors and what might be preventing them or hindering this experience, because it can change really overnight. 2 years ago, we were primarily a university. Our new enrollment were students that were working part-time, so they're coming back to school because they're looking for full-time work. They're working part-time. They had the time and space to do it. Our student body over the course of this last year are now over half of them are working full-time because they're utilizing things like tuition grants. Their employers are helping to pay for their degrees. So now they don't have as much time compared to somebody that maybe is only working part-time. And so we've changed our program, our language, the way we market the program, the benefits of it over time. So I think one of the most important things is understand who your students are. If you're brick and mortar, what does that semester look like from semester to semester? What are the challenges and what are their individual needs? And how quickly can you adapt to that? Like I said, it's a zigzag journey. It's never just a linear thing to say, this is how we do it. This is how it's always going to be. There's always going to be the next challenge, the next thing that say, here's our students, here's what they need. And it's our job to build that infrastructure around them to have the best experience possible to help them be successful. And that's ultimately the name of the game, and why higher ed's kind of fun, because there's never an end, right? It's this ongoing cycle of year to year as things change, the world changes around them.
Yeah, I think if you there was an example in a thing I was in where the first picture was a guy fishing on a quiet lake, right? And it was like, there's a lot of people looking for a career that looks like this. But if you're going to work in higher ed and you're going to work in technology in higher ed, and then it was somebody river rafting, right? Like, this is what we're here for. This is why we're in it. The status quo is not exciting. So then on that note, what are you looking forward to now in the future, as either with this program or things that you are working on? What's kind of on the horizon for that's got you excited?
Yeah. Well, it's certainly a challenge, not a challenge. It can be a challenge, but since our university as a whole went from kind of in the for-profit ed world when that was a big thing to being back to a private university to then now ultimately a couple of years ago getting acquired by the U of A, which is great, right? It's being from Tucson, bear down, shout out U of A. Me personally, it was good because I already have all the swag that I need. My Zoom meetings are easy. I got a block A on everything, but that's a transition. That's a challenge. Because they have Arizona Online, they have a campus-based program, and obviously we have UAGC. And so how we are integrating our programs, our services, to be able to support one another is a challenge. But for us personally, the good thing that we have is experience on our side when it comes to how you deliver student affairs type programming, mentoring, access and wellness, whatever it might be. We have proven systems and ways to be able to do that. Like I mentioned, we have a mobile app that's going to be coming out for our students. We just upgraded a version. So we're thinking big. We're thinking, how can we be the center, the hub for relationship building, mentoring, faculty to student to student, employee to employee. So moving past being just a peer-to-peer mentoring program, but saying, if you're interested in building good relationships with one another, wherever that dynamic might be, come to us. We have a home. We can build the program. We can help work with your people about programming, making sure they're meeting with one another, and evolving past just, that peer-to-peer to saying, we're the relationship center. You want to have something, you want to have some guardrails around it, you want to help promote it, utilize the technology. Well, we've got it. We've got a place to go. We've got a lot of experience. So always, it's going to be a fun year. A challenge, when it comes to that, but also it's worth the challenge. So
the Match.com of higher ed.
Here we go.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Evan, if people wanted to get connected to you, find out more about UAGC Champs Mentoring, where could they find you and find more information about what you work on?
Yeah, just a quick Google search. Like I said, we have a Champs page on the UAGC website. UAGC.edu. You can look under the student experience and go to Champs. You'll see a video of a guy that you're going to recognize.
Yeah.
There may not be some football pictures in there, me kind of telling my story about that, but then also ways to get connected. And people are always welcome to email me as well, evan.gray@uagc.edu. I have a lot of different universities that we work with. We're actually going through a formal program review right now. So we have program reviewers that are going to be coming in. That'll be public knowledge. And I'm happy to share what we've learned in the spirit of higher ed. We always protect certain things, but also the spirit of it is to connect with one another, support one another, see how people are doing different things. And we've just done a ton of that over the last few years. We've learned some things from people along the way, and others have learned from us, along the way as well. So always happy to connect with others and talk a little bit more detail if people are interested in it.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk this stuff down. It's very, the intersection of kind of, technology, relationship building, and all that is, it's prime stuff to talk about. So thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Thank you for listening to the AV-IT Amplifier. Tune in next week for more with today's guest. It'll be great or your money back. Your host has been Ryan Gray. He's on the tweeters at Ryan_A_Gray, or find him on LinkedIn to connect. Please subscribe and give the show a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. This show is brought to you by higheredav.com. The views expressed here are not necessarily those of our respective institutions, employers, or sponsors. Everyone hang in there, go easy, and we'll be back next week.